Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Creating Community Resilience Lunch, Learn, and Connect. I am Thomas McGregor. I am the Executive Director of the Phoenix School of Roseburg. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. Real quick, we're going to check to make sure our friends on the feed and Zoom can hear us. If you're on Zoom, could you give us a thumbs up to let us know that you can hear us? All right, we got a thumbs up. All right, so those on Zoom, we don't have the camera on today. We're just gonna have like kind of an NPR for you all, just like a podcast, I guess, for this Zoom. But we're here at Aviva Health in Roseburg. Got 20 people in here. They seem to be satisfied with their lunch. Hopefully you all are having a great lunch out there on Zoom. All right, so let's begin. Welcome. Creating Community Resilience was founded in 2016. We're here to increase the understanding of ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, or adverse community environs, increase our community's capacity to implement trauma-informed care, and promote resilience and healing in our region. We started Lunch, Learn, and Connect events as an ability to have us come together, engage with one another, network with one another, and have some shared learning. So I really am thankful that everybody could join us today and bring your energy to this. And, you know, we understand you have a lot of places to be every day, so we're grateful you made some time for this month. Before we begin, I'm trying to advance the slide. I've advanced the slide now. Before we begin, I'd like to first acknowledge the many tribes and bands who call Oregon their ancestral territory and honor the ongoing relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we all call home. We recognize the continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and the subsequent bands within those tribes, and we thank them for continuing to teach us how we might all be here together. Next slide, please. All right, just a little bit of information about CCR. Here's the 12 leadership agencies of CCR at this time, or excuse me, 11, who have committed to engaging in trauma-informed work and really wanting to achieve best practices for everybody in our community around what we call the near sciences: neuroscience, epigenetics, ACEs, and resilience. As you can see by this list, these organizations have a broad reach across Douglas County and help support resilience building at multiple levels and stages of individuals' lives. It's important to note that our group is not limited to these representatives from these organizations. We welcome everyone from Douglas County to join in creating community resilience and become a key partner. We would love for you to participate on our committees. We'd love for you to propose us projects, and we'd love to us all to have our voice being heard, how we can be a stronger community. To be frank, this was some community leaders that came together after October 1st, 2015. We want to be stronger together. Please join in on this work. Next slide. To be down to the nuts and bolts of it, the mission and vision of CCR, you can see it there on the screen, but we have perhaps in Douglas County been raked with our public health outcomes in a place we don't want to be ranked. We would like to do better. And so we have a moonshot goal in our strategic plan right now. We're trying to move Douglas County up from the bottom of the state health rankings to getting towards the top of the state health rankings by 2040. And specifically, we'd like to be in the top 10% of counties. So, you know, JFK said we're going to the moon. Let's go to the moon. We believe that we can achieve this goal to improve health and well-being in our community by centering our work on the mitigation and prevention of the twin pair of ACEs, adverse community or childhood experiences, and adverse community environs. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please Google pair of ACEs, trauma-informed, and you'll see a tree graphic. It's very powerful. Next slide. The CCR training team. This is one of the vital parts of CCR. In 2021, we partnered with Southern Oregon Success, South Coast Together, and we became regional collaboratives like CCR to spread the awareness of ACEs and trauma-informed care in Southwest Oregon. And we all train community members in ACE Interface, an evidence-based curriculum that helps us understand what's happening with neurosciences, ACEs, and resiliency building. Currently, we have a team of acting trainers, over a dozen, with a wide range of expertise and interests available to present to your agency, to come to your community group and present these trainings. So please do reach out and engage with us. For details, Understanding ACEs curriculum addresses breakthroughs in research on the impacts of toxic stress and trauma on brain development, health, and social skills. This training covers the latest science related to the progressive impact of adversity and the lifelong effect of adverse childhood experiences. It also provides an overview of neuroscience and a bit on epigenetics, information about the adverse childhood experiences study from the 1990s, and implications regarding how to foster resilience and an understanding of trauma-informed care in general. This training was developed directly by Dr. Robert Onda, a co-principal investigator and the designer for the now famous ACEs study, and Laura Porter of the ACE Interface, and has been reviewed and approved by known experts in the field for its scientific content. The second training to follow up the Understanding ACEs training, Self-Regulation and Resilience, this training reviews the science from understanding ACEs, but takes you further into understanding the impacts of trauma on our brain, behavior, and introducing steps we can all take to support resilience building in our lives. We now offer a third training opportunity designed specifically for parents, and that's called the Help That Helps. We also have booklets for that are available. Super powerful stuff that you can hand to somebody and change their life. Next slide, please. Yay, the lawyers are here. Legal statement and disclaimer. Creating community resilience provides science-based education. This is not to be considered professional advice.
So one of the lovely things about Tammy and I is where we come from when we got into this work. So I have been in this county. Many of you have known me for years. I've worked in various fields through medical care, mental health care, Head Start, the Douglas County Juvenile Department, running treatment programs. I've been working with kids and families in this community for about 20 years. My background is really strongly in mental health and in trauma, and and specifically in kids who have had some experience with abuse or the child welfare system or some kind of attachment disruption along those ways. So when I came to Douglas Cares, all I wanted to do was heal families who'd been hurt. That was my main focus. I didn't have a really good, strong foundational understanding of what those investigations looked like and how to make sure that what the parts that we did had to be ready to be presented in the courtroom, that we had to make sure that nothing along the chain was ever impacted in a way that would compromise a case. And so I was thrilled to welcome Tammy Terry to our team. She comes from a 15-year background in law enforcement and specifically in child abuse investigations. So anything like this?
No, just that, along with that kind of background, I think we all come to this table together.
And I'm thrilled to have her. So the way that we divide up our work is I generally do the direct supervision for our mental health department, and we'll talk a lot more about what that looks like a little later on in the slides. And Tammy makes sure that our forensic team is top notch and meeting all the best practices of the field, and that everything we produce, all the evidence we produce as Douglas Cares, will hold up in court and make that solid case if need be. Advance. So Markel handed out some our notes for you all. The back page of that is a quick and easy handout. So if you forget about anything that we talked about today, the most important pieces we're going to cover are about what to do when you suspect child abuse. And that one pager tells you what your job is, what your job isn't, and who else on the back page, who else is in the mix there. So your main takeaway today is going to be, what do you do if you think something's wrong? And that one will go with you and just be an easy one pager. On top of that, we're going to be talking through a lot of different things today, including some types of abuse. We're going to get a little bit deeper into sex abuse and the risks in our community specifically around those things. And I also wanted to, I have that up at the top, acknowledgements. We don't do this work alone at Douglas Cares. We exist in a continuum of care and of investigations and public service. So we don't do our work without child welfare and without law enforcement to walk hand in hand with us to investigate cases, to produce evidence, to protect children, to keep families safe, and to follow them on their journey all the way through, hopefully to reunification if they end up being separated. So we can't do this work without our partners, and I just want to make sure that I always share how important they are to this work. As we move through, we're going to talk very specifically about our community and how that fits into Oregon's child abuse community, how our trends fit into the larger trends, and what all that looks like, and then what you should do if you think something's going on, and then some things to look for. We're talking about child abuse today. As Tammy mentioned, some of us in this room, typically a greater proportion of people who end up in the service field have some personal experiences that they bring to the table. Some of these things might be difficult to hear. They might be triggering. At any point, if you'd like to step out, that's fine. If you need to stand up and move around, that's also fine. If you would like me to shut up, you can just kind of flag me and I'll pause for a few moments if that will be helpful. But just take care of yourself. This is hard work, and we don't do it because we have no experience of what it's like to go through terrible things. So I appreciate all of you being here and through that. The first thing we're going to start with is a little bit of an exercise. So since we're talking so much about child abuse reporting today, I wanted to start it off with, how do you know if what you're hearing is accurate? Can anybody think of some stories where kids told them something that ended up being totally different than what they heard in that experience? Anyone want to share? Come on, Christy. I know you got. All right. Well, I have one that I have to share with you. This is a drawing made by a child. What's your first thought about what's going on in this picture? Yeah, mom is making some money in a very, it's a side hustle. It's a very respectable field. Nothing wrong with this at all. But what really happened here was that the mom is a house cleaner. This is a broom that the child drew. So sometimes the stories that you're hearing are not necessarily as horrendous as you think they are. But that being said, kids don't lie about child abuse. The rates of false accusations are less than 2%. So if you hear something concerning, it's important to take it seriously. Sometimes it's like this and it's a misinterpretation, but that's not necessarily your job to figure out. If you hear something concerning, it's important to let the right people know so that whole investigation can happen.
You know, something to think about also is that a child is going to disclose this much
Yes.
of what's actually happening. So if you're getting this piece, your imagination can imagine what else is going on.
So who in this room is a mandatory reporter? I think that's everyone. Yeah. So Oregon has one central reporting line for child abuse, which you all know because you're all mandated reporters. That was a change a few years ago that has been a bumpy change. As a lot of you probably know, in the first year or so, we ended up having like hold times of sometimes 4 hours or more trying to share this concerning report that we found. These days, it's a lot more streamlined. You get through a lot faster. The longest during really peak times I've heard of any of my staff waiting on hold was like 45 minutes. So not fantastic, but still pretty good. Did you? Okay. Um, but one of the larger critiques of that is that some things that you report don't get assigned when the people on the ground involved really think they should. And when it doesn't get assigned, that means that there's no investigation that happens. That means that means Douglas Cares doesn't get involved, child welfare doesn't get involved, the police don't get involved. We as a community are kind of waiting until something else happens. And hopefully when that report goes through, it will get resolved. So some of the numbers behind this in Oregon, in 2022, because child welfare publishes data books every couple of years. So the most recent one they have published is 2022. There were more than 87,000 calls made to the child abuse hotline. And of those, only 50,000 were assigned, and only 7,000 children were removed and put into foster care. So most of those calls come in by people who are required to do it. But then you can see that other 25% up there, those are neighbors, other family members who think something's going on. Anybody can report, as all of you know. The people in this room are the ones who make the majority of those reports. I didn't see you because you're over here. We have one person in this room who's not a mandated reporter. Two. Oh, you too. Yeah. Yeah, and we'll talk more about the really special and important role they hold in this continuum, because it's critical, and a lot of us could not do our job and we couldn't protect families without them. So they are not making child abuse reports, but they still are hugely influential and beneficial in this line of work. Anything else? Yeah.
So who thinks that if you take a child abuse, Sarah, you're an abused child, you're coming to me to disclose something. I have to go to my boss to report that, right? Because that's how most of our protocols and policies are. How many people, you don't have to raise your hand, think that that meets your obligation as a mandatory reporter? It does not at all. So the person hearing firsthand from that kid's story is the one who is required by law to report it through the hotline. Now, your boss can go ahead and do whatever they want. They can call in the hotline as well, but you are the one who is required. And not only that, but it's a Class A violation. And we're not talking a Class A citation for driving. It's a $2,000 penalty, plus any other penalties the court wants to apply. So, I mean, it's a serious deal. And up in Clackamas County, they've actually started enforcing that. So, you know, like everything else, it's only a matter of time for us to start heading this direction, which isn't a bad thing. Kind of reinforces what we need to be doing to begin with.
So this piece, I'm going to have Tammy do most of, because this really fits into her specialty. There are lots of different types of abuse, and they have a lot of times it's just what you can investigate and what you can get a charge on, but there are lots of different types of abuse here.
So starting out with physical abuse, that's pretty self-explanatory, right? People think, you know, and sometimes we even get kids who report, mom spanked me last night.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a level of reasonableness with the law. So a parent is allowed to reasonably discipline their child. So where does that line get drawn between physical abuse and just punishment, right? Me raising my kids, my punishment for my kids might have been more severe than how Sarah raised her kids. So where's that line? Doesn't mean I abused my kids, although I did think about it a few times, as you know, as a mother of 5 kids. Yeah. But physical abuse is injury.
Okay, it's injury. It doesn't necessarily mean there has to be a mark. It's injury beyond what a reasonable person would do. There's gray. It's a gray line. So it's all about interpretation. Sex abuse, that's pretty self-explanatory. Any kind of sexual inappropriateness can be wrapped up. And here's the biggest thing. It not only gets wrapped up into actual abuse, even though it may not be all that inappropriate. But remember, you're only getting this big of the piece.
Yeah.
There's a lot more going on behind the scenes than what you may be getting. So it can always lead to further disclosures.
And with sex abuse, a lot of times we do these presentations with teens and they don't realize that that any kind of sexual interaction online is also sex abuse. Teens can't consent. They can't consent to sharing pictures of their bodies. They can't consent to sexting, to having, those sexual conversations online or via text. So there's the charge online corruption of a minor, where if you're having these types of not you, obviously, if perpetrators are having these conversations with minors, that's a crime. And even if the minor thinks they're consenting, they aren't.
And with sex abuse also, if it's going over state lines. So how many kids actually think, okay, is this inside Oregon or is it outside Oregon? Because this guy's really cool, right? If it crosses that state line, it turns into a federal matter, which is a whole nother ballgame. So it goes real deep real quick. Neglect can be anything from just lack of meeting basic needs to a lack of knowledge. So, there's a lot of parents out there that don't know how to raise kids. Is it their fault? Not necessarily, but it is our responsibility to step up to the plate and help educate them. But it's not meeting the basic needs: medical care, food, water, shelter, all of those things, clothing. Mental injury. That one's a kind of a hard one when you're actually trying to charge somebody with that, because it's a hard one to prove. What hurts my feelings may not hurt Sarah's feelings, and vice versa. And what affects me deeply may not affect her as deep, or vice versa. But mental injury is from yelling, screaming, name calling, all those things that you sit there and you just think, God, that had to crush somebody.
Yeah.
Well, guess what it's doing to a kid who's developing, who's trying to create themselves and their personality and the people that they're trying to become. And then they're getting knocked down. That's mental injury. Threat of harm. Threat of harm can be either intentional or it can be not intentional. Again, a lack of knowledge. Or it can also be frequenting a drug place. What's the threat of harm there? What could possibly go wrong there? DV in the home. If there's violence in the home, it's proven that they're not just beating up on mom. They're not just beating up on dad. Guess who the easier victims are?
Yeah.
Human nature is to go to the easy route. So that pretty much covers it, unless you have something else.
And for a lot of these, not all of them, obviously, like neglect, we're not jumping in and trying to remove kids because mom and dad don't have enough money. That's sometimes these reports can be made in a way to get more resources into the family. I've worked with countless families who didn't have enough money to buy basic resources. And Head Start was hugely beneficial in jumping in and providing for those basic needs for the family. This is another place where I want to shout out for child welfare. We have a slide later to talk in more depth about it, but their mission is to keep kids safe in their homes. So their goal is to keep families together. And if it's about food, or if it's about a roof on their house, or if it's about a place for them to stay if they're homeless, they're going to jump in and provide those resources before they ever consider pulling a child out of a home. One that usually falls into the threat of harm. Tammy talked about visiting drug houses, trap houses. We see an unfortunate number of cases of drug exposure. And the way that we determine that there's been drug exposure is that we do urine tests and hair follicle testing for drugs in children, in infants. Almost every child that we test comes up positive. And the most common ones they come positive for are fentanyl, meth, and marijuana. And that's incredibly disturbing because those tests don't tell us how the baby got that in their system. They don't tell us, you know, if they were breathing air that was contaminated, if they were touching surfaces and putting stuff in their mouth. We don't know how, and we don't know how much, but we know that there's enough in that baby's environment that it got into their hair. So that falls under, that can be both neglect and threat of harm. Usually can't be a physical abuse case. But it's really, really common in our community.
So the first thing is victim shopping. People don't just, you know, these offenders don't just wake up one day and say, oh, you know what? I'm gonna go take that kid. That's not how it happens. So they do a lot of shopping. So we recently had a training that we brought in for our MD team members that touched on a lot, way more than I think any of us were probably ready for. But it went into how these offenders actually shop for their victims. And a lot of them will look at a kiddo, and then if it's a single mom, that's how they're choosing their victims. So if they actually want to have contact with that kid, they're actually going to make friends with the kid, but guess who they're going to start dating? They don't give a crap about mom. They want that kiddo. And mom is needy, is having a whole bunch of different issues on their own. And so she's kind of feeding into that attention, right? I mean, we've all been to the point where we just need somebody to let us know that we're okay, somebody to make us feel special. So those are the kind of things that they use to go and find these kids. So they're buttering up mom. They're making mom think that she's just the world to them, when in reality, they don't want anything to do with mom. They want the kiddo. A lot of characteristics with the child molesters are deviant sexual arousal, pro-offending attitudes. They're almost always very charming. They are the kind of people that you walk up and go,
Never in a million years.
never, no, they got it wrong. They got it wrong. Cops got it wrong. Those are the kind of charming people that get this. Sex is a coping strategy. Narcissism. I'm not going to get caught. I will turn this around to where I'm the good one or I'm the victim. I'm the victim. The kid doesn't like me. Your kid doesn't like me. He's making up stories. I didn't touch him. You know, it's not my problem. It's the kid's problem, right? Most of them are between the ages of 10 and 12 when they first offend. That's scary, right? So there is a myth that has recently come out. And got the wrong one here. Actually, I'm gonna add this stuff right here now. So emotional problems, impulse control. How many can actually see that in a sex offender, right? Totally. Social competency issues. They can't get along with people, or they're just isolated. They prefer not to be around people. When in reality, they really just don't want to get caught. You're not their people. They want the other people. Childhood physical abuse increased the risk for arrest of adult sex crime. So here's one of the myths, is that if you're a child molester, you're a sex offender, and of course, you know, everybody wants to know why. What happened? What created this mindset? What made this person think that that was okay, right? Of course, my first thought is they were offended on as a kid, right? They were a victim. The only thing that's proven is that child physical abuse is completely correlated with being a sex offender, but them being offended on. So the sex offender themselves, having grown up being a victim themselves, has nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. And so a lot of these allegations and you know, everybody watches true crime TV, right? What's one of the first defenses? Oh, I was perked on as a kid. Buddy, it doesn't get you out of it. You see, right in the road. me know what crossover sexual offending is. I didn't either, don't feel that. So it's a classification of a sex offender based on the current victim selection. So if I'm a female and I like 8-year-old little boys, that means that that's all I'm ever gonna look for, right? I'm not gonna look at 10-year-old boys, I'm not gonna look at 12-year-old girls. This is all I'm gonna look at. That is not true. They have found, in fact, they have an Australian study where out of 128 offenders, 63% of them crossed over. So their type, if you will, they completely blew that out of the water. It didn't matter to them. It was whoever was easiest to get a hold of. Out of that, 48% said the age group changed. So how many times have you heard this gentleman abused that 5-year-old little girl? So the 12-year-old little girl is safe. That's not it. They're crossing over, it doesn't matter to them. Some of them are gender or even relationship. So if you have one offender who is staying with family, say they're abusing their own kiddos or family members, they'll go outside of that relationship or vice versa. If they're offending on other kids outside of their relationship. So say you have a school teacher who's having a sexual relationship with one of their students, they're just being inappropriate. More than likely it's going on at home too. They're gonna cross over. And that's a new concept that is just now starting to come into play with investigations and with DHS also. Because this isn't how it's been operated. This hasn't been standard operating procedure. The belief behind it was, you know, if they like the black cats, that's what they're gonna stay with. The yellow cats are safe. And that's just not how it goes.
And that matters because there are a lot of placement decisions that child welfare makes. They will often remove the child that they know was a victim and leave another child in the home, either because they're a different gender or a different age.
Or they haven't been a victim yet.
Or they haven't been a victim yet. And the thought behind that is to keep, you know, families together, and they believe that the other child's going to be safe, but there's no reason to believe that.
So one of the big key phrases that I actually really like, and it totally comes in off it, is sex crimes are acts of secrecy and denial, a place where offenders often seek psychological refuge. So they're looking for whatever it is that they're filling that niche in, right? They're looking for those ingredients in somebody when they're shopping. They're missing this, they're missing that. They're shopping, they've got their shopping list and they're gonna go after somebody who can supply that, right? If I'm looking for a cow, I'm not gonna go to a goat auction, right? Sorry, I'm a farmer. But that's how it works. You got little kids. I'm a single mom. I'm trying to make ends meet. He makes money, he's charming, he's showing me attention. Especially when you get their victims.
We've worked a couple of years ago with a young man, a 15-year-old boy who whose mom started a relationship with an adult man. And the man, she was not well off, she was quite poor. The man helped her out, and he was a shining star, Romeo figure. He paid her rent and took care of the whole family. And eventually he started asking, you know, for something in return, and what he wanted in return was time alone with the boy, with the 15-year-old boy. And so in effect, mom sold her son for rent money. And you know, I never ever want to be in a position where I would feel that kind of desperation. But also that young man spent a long time with us going through our services. And I don't know that you heal 100% from that kind of thing. So the reason that we're talking to you guys about this and about sex offenders is that sex offenders try to find places where children are. They are going to be active in churches or in schools or in Boy Scouts, when I was a Boy Scout leader, I had just real creepy vibes about one of our other leaders. He kept, it's a basic tenet of Boy Scouts that you're never alone with a kid, never. You have a buddy, they have a buddy, every single time. But this guy kept doing like things where he'd give a kid a ride alone and, or kind of walk off away from the group with them. And, I don't know that anything ever happened with him, but because he was violating enough of our Boy Scout rules, me and the other leaders got together and got him kicked out of Boy Scouts. No investigations, nothing on his record, nothing like that. But he's no longer allowed in Boy Scouts, which probably didn't help a lot because he was also very active in his church youth group. So they're around us, and unfortunately, it's really, really common, especially in Douglas County. There's a lot of sex abuse in Douglas County. Some figures say 1 in 10 men have committed some kind of sex crime, which is a terrible statistic. And I certainly don't mean to point anybody out or to, I mean, it's mind boggling. It's hard to wrap your head around how common this is, and then figure out how to act, like, feel safe in your world. But they are there. When kids tell us about it, it's real. They didn't make it up. They didn't exaggerate. They didn't lie. As Tammy said, they told you this much when this much is happening. And it's really, really common if they recant. If they say it didn't happen, it probably still did. Many people say something happened and then say, oh wait, no, I made it up because it's such a big deal, or they feel bad, or the perpetrator has convinced them that it's their fault, or that they owe them something, or that they're going to lose something if they tell. Next slide. So Tammy talked about some of these 2 myths already. That the whole victim type is nonsense. People who offend. They beat their wives. They rape their adult partners. They hit their children and have sexual offenses with their children, with neighbor children. It's whatever they've got access to, and whoever is most vulnerable to that crime, they will seek out. Most of them don't have that very, very strong preference where they won't go around that.
It's human nature to take the easiest route.
Yeah.
The easiest target.
And that's why kids who have cognitive delays or physical disabilities are so vulnerable, because nobody will believe them. They can't say the words out loud. So if you ever hear something like that from a kid with extra vulnerabilities, don't assume they're making crap up. They probably are more likely to be offended against than kids that will tell you, everything that's ever happened to them. And then as she said, there's usually not a history of sex abuse. There's no correlation between sex abuse as a child and sex offense as an adult. There's zero. Lots and lots of people get abused. Only a handful of people abuse. There is a slight correlation with physical abuse, with males who are physically abused, who then later become sex offenders. The next piece is like recognizing, how do you know? How do you know what to look for when something's happening to a kid? A lot of kids, if it's new abuse, will come up with behavioral changes. Those of you who work with children, can you shout some out that you've seen?
So on a general day, you might
Yeah.
have like, that is really outgoing and engaging with a lot of people, and then all of a sudden that person is off on their own and not engaging the way that they would, or
Yeah.
maybe their clothes are dumpier looking than they usually, and that's my own word, dumpier looking or whatever than they would normally be seen.
You see that a lot in teens and preteens. All of a sudden,
Yeah.
you have a kid that's normally clean and well kept. All of a sudden they get dirty, their hair is greasy, they stink.
Yeah.
They just don't care.
Yeah. That's really, really common side effect of emotional distress is that you stop taking care of yourself. Doesn't necessarily mean abuse is definitely happening, but it's something to keep a closer eye on for a kiddo. What else? Yeah.
Regression and body training.
Oh, nice. Yes, very good. Yeah, if you've got a kiddo who's 4, 5, 6, and they've been using the toilet for a long time, and then all of a sudden they're having a lot of accidents. Again, doesn't necessarily mean abuse is happening. but it's a common side effect of both sex abuse and physical abuse, that a child will regress in that kind of thing.
Yeah, we see a lot of withdrawal with the kids that are 3 and under, that you can actually see them completely shut down and hide in a corner, not go
Yeah.
out, not eat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the same symptoms as depression.
Yes.
And you can tell that something's going on emotionally. When you get into older kids, the preteen, older teen, young teen age group, you start seeing this difference with boys and girls. Girls kind of go in and they hurt themselves and they hurt their own things and they engage in really risky behavior that puts them in danger. And boys are more likely to go out. Again, not 100% across the board. Everybody's their own person. But there's more aggression and more destruction with young boys, and it kind of goes out. Middle kids, like 8, 9, 10, sometimes the girls will start destroying their dolls and blacking out their eyes, cutting their hair off. You can pick up these signs and symptoms. The most common child abuse, the most common way to abuse a kid varies by age. So little babies, often you'll see bite marks. Parents will accuse other kids of doing it. But if you see a lot of bite marks and maybe you're the child care provider and you know that that's not happening at school, that's a thing to look into. I don't know why parents bite their kids, but sometimes they do. When you get into that 6, 7, 8, there's a lot of bruising around the butt and legs and on the face and head. Sometimes you'll see like pattern bruises, like they'll hit them with something. You can see a cord makes kind of a loop bruise. There are burns. Some people burn their kids, sometimes with cigarettes and sometimes things like straighteners or curling irons. Young infants get a lot of those injuries. And for those of you who work with littles, babies who can't move can't bruise themselves.
They don't bruise, they don't bruise.
Right? If they're not independently mobile, there's no way they can give themselves a bruise. And even in their first toddler days, you know, when they're still pretty slow and shaky, they should not be giving themselves bruises. Now some of us have really, really dedicated children who there are kids who are going to move around and who are going to be covered with bruises, and it's really just their own fault. But mostly if you've got that many bruises and if you've got those bruises that young, it needs somebody to take a look and see what's going on.
And a lot of times, sorry, I didn't.
No, go ahead.
A lot of times female abusers will end up hurting their genitals, especially on little boys. So they'll be at their wits' end. They're getting ready to change a diaper. And guess what they do? They pinch or they flick or they pull. So you'll see redness, you'll see swelling, you'll see bruising. That happens quite frequently.
And so in our stats, men are more commonly the abusers. Women are definitely abuse their children. And they are the perpetrators of sex abuse. So it happens, and don't rule people out because of their gender. When with teenagers, the most common abuse type is they get into full-on fist fights with their parents. Because by that time they're just really fed up with the abuse and they start fighting back, and whoever's hitting them doesn't back down. So we get fist fights, we get really brutal beatings when kids get into that age when they're starting to kind of push back. So those again are not, it's not an equal fight if it's with a parent. It's always abuse, even if the kid is. So learn to recognize those things. If there's changes in the kid's life, you should be there and asking questions. The next part is record. You don't need to take a novel, but if you're like working with a kid sporadically, like you see him every day and there's just little things that kind of trigger your memory, like maybe this isn't quite right. Write that stuff down, and then at the end of a couple of weeks, if you see like a pattern of stuff of changes and behavioral things that just don't look right, then you might want to make a call. For other people, you're going to make that call the first time you do something. And then report. We all know how to report to the child abuse hotline. If you could change this slide. There are, kids sometimes intend to tell you something happened to them. Sometimes they come to you seeking help. And sometimes it's an accident and then they didn't know. We had a little girl who came in for something else and she kind of accidentally started talking about how she sat under a blanket with her dad and she was really uncomfortable when she was under the blanket with dad because he had his hands on her and we asked her, well, what does that mean? What happens with his hands under the blanket? And she talked about him, touching her thighs and she never intended to say this was sex abuse. She didn't know it was sex abuse. So sometimes you'll hear stories, either because kids don't know what they're saying to you or because, it just comes out in a moment of weakness when they really intend not to tell anybody what's going on. And in those cases, either of those cases, you have to walk this very careful line of reassuring them, telling them that it's, we're gonna walk beside you with this, you're strong enough to handle it. Telling people that everything will be okay is really, it's problematic when you get to older kids who know that their whole life is about to turn upside down and it's not going to be okay. Telling them that they have the strength to get through it is really the way they want to learn. With younger kiddos, sometimes it can be that comfort to say everything's gonna be okay. Like whatever happens, this will be over sometime.
Yeah, basically, it's just to make sure that they know that they're heard and you're there to support them.
Yeah.
And don't judge.
And remember, like, you might see something and you're not sure. It doesn't necessarily mean that abuse is happening. There are some things you guys know what you have to report, whether, even if you're not really 100% sure something's happening, you know what you have to report. Sometimes you end up seeing these behavior changes and these things over time. Maybe you see a teacher. Teachers are perpetrators. Not all of them, but sometimes. But that's a profession that people go into if they want to get close to children. So it's important to be on the lookout for behavior that's not appropriate for a teacher. Sometimes they're going to stand a little bit too close if they want to pull a kid kind of away from the group. These are just things to kind of keep an eye on. It doesn't necessarily mean something bad is happening. Some really, really wonderful and dedicated teachers do spend one-on-one time with kids so that they can help them progress into the next place, so that they can really deal with those concerns that they have that they're not willing to tell anybody else. For the most part, teachers are wonderful, beautiful people who really want to help children, but that's also a place where you can find children if you can hurt them.
Churches are another one. Where's the one place you can go where touchy, feely, hugs, hands on the arms are welcome? It's church, right? So church is another place where they go shopping.
Yeah, and Boy Scouts. Any place where you can have access to children is a place to go. Go ahead. Let's move through this slide, everyone. The main, and again, if you're all mandated reporters, you can make a report and be anonymous. You don't have to tell them who you are. They'll ask you your name and your date of birth and your address and all this stuff, but you can say no. So if you're ever talking to somebody else who doesn't want to make those reports, you can also help them remember that you don't have to say that. You also know that they're going to ask you things that you don't know about the case or the child. And it's okay to say you don't know. It's not okay to go do an investigation yourself. It really compromises a case if a child ends up telling their story 16 times, or if lots of different people hear it and hear different things. You want to add anything to that?
It can not only change the details, the timing, everything down to just diluting the facts. So that when it actually, goes to an interviewer for them to go fact find, well, mom told me it was this, dad told me, the school lady told me it was that, or they talked about a black cat and now all of a sudden it's a blue dog. And it's those things that the less these kiddos can talk about it and have to talk about it, the better, the more credible the information that is that you're going to get.
So that's where we come in, or rather, this is what happens with the whole investigation. The disclosure is made to somebody in this room. You call the child abuse hotline, that's a report. Advocacy, So Douglas Cares provides advocacy, but here's where I really want to put a plug in for peace at home advocacy and confidential advocacy. A lot of times, so everybody in my agency has to tell. Everybody in my agency has to be really close partners with child welfare and with law enforcement. And that makes people feel like we're part of this system, this punitive system, this big brother type of field that's going to take things away from them. Having a safe place to tell your story and to explore your options with someone who is not definitely going to report on you can really be hugely beneficial in this continuum. It helps people compose their thoughts. It gives a chance, and they're not condoning child abuse. They're not protecting child abusers. Absolutely not ever. But often they are educating and they're helping with initial safety planning, and they're are you burning up?
I'm glad about that.
And they can often help encourage mom to make their own reports or to make their own changes to make things better and protect kids. So I've had people who wanted to talk about something but were too afraid to be involved, and I pushed them over to Peace at Home side so that they can tell their whole story to someone who's not going to tell it. And then I've later seen those cases come through my doors, so I know that conversation went in a way that that ended up protecting the child. So confidential advocacy is a really important piece of this puzzle. That doesn't mean you can be confidential advocacy. Only a few people have that special privilege, but it is important. Then that investigation, it can either be child welfare or law enforcement, or it can be both. Child welfare has a branch called Otis, and I never remember what that stands for. Organization
Training. Oregon Training Institute. Something.
Yes,
Something.
it doesn't really make much sense, but they investigate childcare centers, residential facilities, and foster parents. Regular DHS investigates parents and caregivers. Then there's us. We do the forensic interviews, we do medical exams, we do our own advocacy that helps connect families with resources and helps them through the whole court process and all of that, all those pieces that's really challenging. Then there's court, and in court, that can be either a jurisdictional trial where DHS is proving that they need to take custody of the children for their safety, or it can be a criminal proceeding where whoever hurt the child is actually on trial and facing criminal charges. Those two things are often separate, and too many of the ones that are just jurisdictional should be criminal and don't ever get that way. But that's the state of where we are right now. And then the follow up the long-term care. Douglas Cares has therapeutic services that we can follow a family for years afterward, with really comprehensive trauma-focused therapy and family building as they move through. Child welfare, we were a pilot program here, I think 3 years ago, for their Vision for Transformation, where they're working really hard on family preservation. They're trying to remove fewer children and put in supports and safety practices for kids to remain in the home. And the reason that they're doing that, and the reason that I support that personally, is that being pulled into the foster system increases the amount of trauma you've experienced by tenfold sometimes. So if the original abuse is serious, if it's sex abuse, if there's an imminent threat to life and limb, they need to be removed, and they need to be removed immediately, no questions. Sex abuse, they never need to go back. Sex abusers don't get better. But for a lot of the other cases, for drugs, for some physical abuse that parents can be helped through, or emotional abuse or neglect, parents can be helped, and they're gonna have better outcomes if they stay in that home with support than if they're removed into another family. So that's their main focus, and it has really transformed the landscape in the way services are provided. Douglas County has been a pilot, so we recently went to a membership meeting for the other child advocacy centers in the state, and everybody else is just starting it and they're panicking and they don't know how it's going to go, and they think child welfare just suddenly isn't doing anything about child abuse. But we've had a chance here to see how these changes have really benefited families. And Farah walked out, but they're a really important piece of the puzzle that we wouldn't have been able to have access to without these changes in child welfare. So good things. Okay, so trends in Douglas County. These are all very specific to Douglas County. In 2022, there were 2,700 child abuse reports made to the hotline. Of those, 1,600 were assigned, and that means somebody's going to go out and look at the family and verify that these allegations confirm or decide that there's nothing to go on there. And then at that point, they might push that further on to an investigation, or they might close it at that point. So if they push it further to an investigation, they're usually going to call us in and bring the children into our agency for those interviews and medical exams. Out of those, 337 were founded, and that means child welfare decided this really happened and it's bad. And then those 337 kiddos, 227 of them were placed in foster care just in that year alone. Now, for the past 3 years, we're kind of tracking this, the 3 years prior to 2022, because that's the last one they published data for. We've been seeing a downward trend in kiddos, in reports being made, in those reports being assigned for screening, and in children being removed to foster care. That is pretty nuanced. One of the things that we're seeing more of is that the cases are more intense than they were before. The abuse is more severe. The neglect has gone on for longer, and we're starting to see physical changes due to the neglect. The emotional abuse has broken a kiddo down so that years and years of therapy may not be the right answer. So this is kind of a mixed bag of results. We want more kids at home. We want fewer abuse reports, but we're seeing, especially with the new drug laws, that fewer things are getting reported when they're small. And we still want those reports to happen when they're small, because if we intervene early, we have better results. We have better outcomes. Go ahead. You moved.
My computer is that.
All right. Do you want to talk about this part, or do you want to?
Sure.
We can go briefly because we're running out of time.
So this kind of goes into the dynamics of how we're trying to limit how many times a child has to tell their story. So if you look on the left, without the CACs, it looks like a game of shoots and ladders, right? I mean, we're going every which way. We're talking to everybody under the sun. And each time those details are out there, things are changing, even if it's minute. You ever played the telephone game where you started out with a black and white cat with a pink bow on its tail, and by the end of it, you got a donkey up a tree? That's kind of how it goes. The CACs limit how many people they have to tell, because they're telling their story one time. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to keep them from having to go on the stand, but it definitely helps keep them off the stand.
Yeah.
So their story is out there, it's recorded, and everybody who needs access to it has access to it and doesn't have to go to the kid.
And we all come to the child. We bring the child to the center, and then everybody else on the chain comes to the center to work with them there, so that they don't have to go all over the world. Okay, next one. I forgot to introduce, this is our forensic interviewer, Markel. She is excellent with children of all ages. She really knows how to sit with them in their space and create a safe place for them to talk about what happened to them.
And they're all older than I am.
It's true. It's true. That is a big help. So this is our interview room. This is where Markel works her magic. So this is taken from about where the cameras are. And then that little white thing on the wall with the black dot, that's where the microphone is. So this is where kids sit to tell their story. Sometimes they have Houston. Houston is our facility dog. He's over here, crashed out, really working hard today.
It's working hard.
He's working hard today. The next one. This is our clinic. It's got a privacy place. It's you can't kind of distressing, but that little thing on the counter back there is an infant scale, because we do abuse exams on infants. We have the exam table there. This is where all that stuff happens. This This screen over here is attached to a really fancy expensive camera that can, that can pick out bruises and burns and changes in genitals and things like that really clearly so that somebody can see what the doctor saw when they were doing the exam. Next slide. And these are some of our stats. This is just us. These are the cases that we were part of. In the years up on the screen there, it says, when it says parents, it says, that means both parents together. Both parents together either beat up the child or sexually assaulted their child. Mother is 42 cases out of the total versus 87 for father. Other family members there, 37 in the 2022 year. Step parents and SOs is 44. Most of the time that's stepdads, but we've seen lots of stepmoms hurt kids too. Adoptive parents, that's really distressing, but it's true. Adoptive and foster parents also hurt kids. Just because a kiddo is already in a place where they were supposed to be moved for safety doesn't mean that they're safe. And foster homes do get shut down because they hurt kids. Known family, friends, and then completely out of the family. That's a significant showing there for people who are completely unknown. We in the 90s, we had this whole thing of stranger danger. Usually it's not true. Usually it's somebody you know, somebody who's supposed to love you or care for you. But we did have a pretty strong showing that year of people who were not known to the family. Next slide. And here's the types of abuse for our center. The most work that we do is in sex abuse. It is really common in Douglas County. Right after that is the physical abuse. And part of that is because we don't see as many. I'd say that in the county, physical abuse is more common. Neglect is more common than both of those, but those things aren't being investigated the same way that sex abuse is. And then Carly's Law. Who is familiar with what Carly's Law means? Nobody. So, hey, and I'm sorry. I've got all my people over here. So, Carly's Law was put on the books after a little girl named Carly, who was beaten by a stepdad or a mom's boyfriend. And her case was dismissed. They didn't realize how serious it was, and she died of her injuries. So Carly's Law puts time limits on any type of suspicious injury or anything suspicious for physical injury to make sure that child gets checked out by a medical provider within 48 hours so that we can hopefully prevent anything really serious. Any kind of very serious injury needs to go straight to the emergency room. But if we're not sure, then we need to, they usually call us and we do the Carly's Law exams and we fit them in within the 48 hours of the time that the first investigator made contact with the family and verified that the injury was there, not when the report was made. So if you see something, make sure you report immediately because there is going to be a time lag before that gets into where it needs to go. And then our other types of abuse, that's threat of harm, that's emotional abuse. Those are the things that fall into that category. Next slide. In this, do you want to take this? Because I've forgotten what we were going to say about this slide. Just that it's all of us. And it's, I remember now. Okay, so this means that it takes all of us, that all of us can be part of this chain, and that even if you make a report and nothing comes of it, it is still written down and recorded somewhere. So it's not a worthless report. It goes somewhere and it builds a case sometimes over time. Sometimes your first report won't go anywhere, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't make it. You are all there and making a difference in children's lives all the time. So it's important to make that call. And we're all there together. So Douglas Cares has, So this talks more about the long-term care that Douglas Cares offers. We have a robust team of trauma folks, trauma-specific therapists who have expertise in autism and expertise in cognitive delays and in survivors of sex abuse and physical abuse and attachment disruption and all of these things. We found out early on that we can't really guarantee that this community is going to be able to offer those things. I know Aviva does. They actually have some that we trained. Congratulations. But we had to, by law, we have to figure out how to provide these services for kiddos. And we couldn't rely on that with the community because we're all short-staffed. So we made sure that we had the best trained providers in the community. We also have skills trainers. And for those of you who aren't familiar, a skills trainer is a bachelor level mental health provider who works under the direction of the therapist. So they can take the kid out into the community. They can work on the skills that the therapist is trying to work on in the therapy room. They can take those skills out into the real world and start, coaching them through actually implementing them in practice. We have a brand new therapy program called Family Tree, where it's a team of three, a case manager, a skills trainer, and a therapist who wrap services around a family that's really at risk of having their children moved into foster care or who just had their children placed out of home. And we're trying to get them back home as quickly as possible. So these aren't families where there's sex abuse because I won't touch those. At least the reunification piece. We help the kids obviously and the moms, but we don't try to reunify. So we are just trying to build that family and make it strong and make sure that this doesn't happen again. Next slide. You guys know the child abuse hotline. If you have emergency needs in the community that aren't emergent, these are in your notes, so you don't need to write them down. And then the suicide hotline, if you think somebody's at risk of hurting themselves right now, you can encourage them to call that hotline. You can call it and get some advice. There's also a DAPS crisis line, which is not up here, but they can be helpful as well. And then last slide is Tammy and my contact information.